A very good morning. So, Mr. Mkhize has this book out. It's called Vision 2050. It takes courage to try and predict what's likely to happen in 2050. So I was telling him a story that one political analyst told me once. He says there was an election in India in 2009 and all political analysts got it wrong. All of them. They predicted a wrong party and the wrong party won the election. As it may very well be the case in this country, by the way. So afterwards there was a discussion about, but how could you political analysts get it so wrong? So there was one honest political analyst who stood up and said, look, ultimately as political analysts we're nothing more than soothsayers. That's what we are. But Mkhize, no, I'm sure with 2050 there's more than just soothsaying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mkhize, just I'm going to concentrate a little later on the future, but I would like you to just give us a perspective that helps you build up on the 2050. What is it that you think that are some of the issues that have happened over the past 20 years that are the building blocks for the 2050?
First, I think Xolani has a crush on EFF. Everyone who speaks, he concludes by attaching them to EFF. Thank you so much. Good morning. Well, my reflection will rather go back to 6th, 9th century, before the Common Era type of paradigms. Because I often think that when we do analysis, we want to locate it within periods of time, 1994, 20 years, etc. But I think the best approach would be more to juxtapose and compare any form of analysis, especially when it has to do with society, more on paradigms. Now, you have very embedded and contending paradigms when you look in the centuries that I've mentioned, where you have a liberationist paradigm as led by Moses in the biblical scriptures. And you have a recent post-exilic paradigm which would be led by your Nehemiah, for instance. And you have an exilic paradigm which would be led by your Israel, if you look at the biblical context. And all of these people come within the context of construction and reconstruction of a nation, nationhood, nation identity, where they are trying to extract a national identity, a nation out of other nations, as that nation, the Hebrewic Jewish nation, were trying to construct their identity in the face of other empires, as it were in South Africa right now. As my colleagues have been saying, that South Africa has been trying to come and rise to define, redefine, construct, reconstruct its identity in the light of other existing empires, like your international community, as it will be called. Now, the embedded paradigms will always bring us to two dialectics. The first dialectic is which formulative paradigm do we permit to be authoritative? I'll explain what I mean by that. Mandela comes with a paradigm of reconciliation and reconstruction. And Mbeki comes with a paradigm, growth, employment, and redistribution. I'm not quite aware of the current paradigm. But I appreciate what Trevor has done to collect and give us the NDP. But the question then is, which amongst these paradigms, because usually when we debate the current 20 years, we talk unaware, unconsciously, in contrast of these paradigms. Whether the left will want the RDP, the first phase, recent post-exilic paradigm of Mandela, RDP, etc., or those who are called the Black Diamonds, etc., would want to move forward. There's a professor, Jesse Mugambi, he's a Nairobian. He argued that African reflection must now move away from the mosaic liberator paradigm and enter more into the reconstructionist paradigm. your Ezra, Nehemiah, let's reconstruct, let's rebuild. So paradigms will always be embedded, will always contest and be competitive. So that's the first part that needs to be reflected upon as to which paradigm do we want to consciously locate ourselves. Then the second part that is usually contested in a post, because we are not just living in a post-apartheid South Africa, but we are in a post-exilic state. There is an element of exile and exiles in our reflection of the past 20 years. Yesterday, I read the last chapter of the book of Jeremiah, and I realized that the people who went to Babylon were not more than 5,000, and they were going there incrementally. So it didn't need the whole of us as South Africans to go outside into exile. Either we're in exile across the globe, or in exile just near Madagascar or near Cape Town in Robben Island. But all of that. Now, what you must realize about the dynamics of the exile exiles. I'm using this language because we're in a church setup. Most of us, Doc, Zondi knows that I always do some disclaimers because I sometimes say some radical things. Usually in scripture, when we analyze the people who were against Nehemiah's reconstruction project, your Sanballat, etc., we usually criticize them and demonize them. Yet we do not appreciate the dynamics and the contradiction of the post-exilic and reconstruction tensions between those who were the exiles and those who were holding the struggle inside. Because one of the biggest problems with South Africa is that where do we locate authority? Do we locate authority to those people who went outside, like Thabo, Zuma, Jordan, and all those guys? Or do we recognize the people who are struggling for South Africa right from the inside? Who is more authoritative between these exile and exiles? So then in that space, we look at the condition between the incarnative authorities. The first one is the paradigm. The second one is the incarnative authoritative. The incarnative meaning, who do we recognize more? Do we recognize more John the Baptist or Jesus? Do we recognize more Mbeki or Zuma? I'm using abstract personalities to talk about I'm sure you understand what I'm trying to do. So I'm saying in the past 20 years, these are the two tensions that we have had. And I must add, as I pass the mic, that South Africa is a very, very young society. And I argued in one platform that we say that the 27 years preparation was long. But the founders of the Jewish state, they will tell you that for us, it was more than that. In one case, in Egypt, we had to go and serve 430 years to prepare for the liberation and the reconfiguration of the national identity. Others will say we had to go 70 years to Babylon. Others will say, no, I spent 8 years in preparation, 40 years in academic preparation in Egypt, that's Moses, and 40 years in Midian, and then I served for 40 years, that's 120. So one of the reasons perhaps why in Africa, in South Africa, we are struggling is that there has been an under-preparedness to galvanize in this post-exilic, post-liberation space where people don't appreciate. In the book of Israel, which is a very quiet book in the churches, nobody talks about Israel. Yet it's got a lot to talk about post-liberation, post-exilic nation building. In the book of Israel, there is a verse that says, when they were reconstructing the temple, the young generation was excited. But those who had seen the temple of Solomon, they were depressed, because they had seen the former glory. I am saying, because there is such a shallow historical reflection. I will come to modern social science, Fanon, Marx, I'll come to that later. But let me start there. Because there is such short historical reflection and awareness of post-exilic and post-liberation national construction and reconstruction. We get excited by things that are just the shadows of substance.
Kabazela. Oh, wabeka kabazela. Begil indoda. Thank you very much, Israel. By the way, his name is Israel. So it may be, a little difficult to understand why you want the churches to discuss the book of Israel. Thank you very much. But, because again, ultimately, it comes down to people's experience of democracy, and I want to start with you. And by the way, just get ready. I think we're going to have microphones moving around. And if there are questions, all I'm going to ask you to do is just raise your hand, identify yourself, and also just tell me who you want to ask your question to, and we'll get this going. I really, really would appreciate it if you could just get yourselves ready. It's very important. We don't have a lot of time, but we would like to take as many people as possible. Perhaps it's a good point to start with Mkhize right next to me, in terms of just the follow-ups on because ultimately, it may very well be important to understand the complicated issues that constitute our society, the constitution of the society. Who is who? Where are they? But why is that important? Is it simply because that affects the reconstruction of society, that affects who we ultimately become, that affects the nationhood of the society, it affects whether or not we come back as a united nation? Is that the reason why you want us to understand these complicated dynamics?
Well, I want to say that one of the achievements of social science is to adopt an interdisciplinary outlook to life, so that you don't just see life from a science perspective, from a military perspective, etc. So the necessity of understanding of most, if not all, sciences of life. Actually, the Athenian Greeks was created in that way. For you to get a degree, you would be educated in biology, educated in many disciplines. So as we reconstruct and construct South Africa as a new society, if you will, it's imperative that we try by all means to do sort of an all-round induction, so that you do not have a narrow political micro national construction agenda that tends to omit what perhaps is not preferable nor favorable to you, and is a construction of something that must just remain. I'll make an example. When you look at the gear policy, let me just come back from the abstract to something concrete. When you look at the gear policy, its fundamental premise was to respond to the question of, do we have the pass to be able to fund the desirable infrastructure, to fund the desirable new nation that is required, to fund the desirable roadmap that the state must take. If we're talking about the welfare of labor, the private sector must be vibrant. But does the private sector have a conducive environment here to make the money so that it can address the question of absorbing more labor into its fold? So, as we construct society, we need that multidisciplinary awareness, of almost all, if not most, of the necessary tools of
No, for me, Prof, it's an important question, and I'll tell you why I think it is important. It is important because, on one hand, there's an accusation in society that people do not engage enough, that they are not interested in knowing about the RDP in '94, where it came from. Was there ever a conference that discussed RDP, and how is it that in 1996, 2 years into the new government, then we changed into gear? Why is it that there was that fight? And ultimately, where are we in terms of policy? So on one hand, there's that argument. But on the other hand, there's an argument that says, listen, we are a Twitter generation, right? We're dealing in 140 characters. Please, don't bother me with those things. Just tell me what is important and leave out what is not important. It is a current discussion that we have. Why is it important that we should bother ourselves with all these policies?
Yeah. Let me pick up on where Israel left, because he has actually raised a very important narrative which we should have. And he's actually correct to say whenever there's a country that's oppressed, it is not the entirety of that country or nation that go into exile. It's always a small number. But what has also been very interesting is it is always the dominance of the exile group that ultimately takes over. And but part of it is because the exiles, those who remain, create a narrative that disempowers themselves. I grew up being told that our leaders are in prison or in exile. Effectively, what we were saying is that here we are not leaders. If we are leaders, it's by default, because the real leaders are out there. So when the leaders come, you paralyze yourself and listen to what the leaders are saying, and they take over. So what we have experienced is not an accident. That you'll find that the dominance of the exile group at the level of thinking, but also part of it has also to be derived from the fact that they have traversed a number of countries, so they are also bringing perspectives that we may not have been aware of. So it is also understandable. It's not something that you must just contest because you want to create a dichotomy between those who remained and those who were outside. But what is important is really what Mandela always said, because sometimes we also caricature Mandela or abstract him outside the broader masses. In his first address, when he came out of prison, he says, "I'm your servant." And he says, "You have made it possible for me to be released." But what is important about this is the engagement of the masses of the people in the creation of that possibility. But what also happened is that once people were in power, they thought they can think for the masses. Hence the revolt. The revolt comes because the masses are now simply onlookers to a democracy. They are bystanders. And hence you saw the revolt within the ANC. You see also the revolt in society. Part of it is that we want to be part of the solution. But there are some amongst us who want leaders to be providers of solutions. So if you find a leader who does not provide you the solution, you have a problem with that leader. But if somebody comes up with a solution, you also have a problem with that leader. But I think what we should be having in this country is more of a dialogue. But there's a point I wanted to raise. And I raise it with a great sense of humility. That the leaders that we have today have been engaged for the last 40 years, 50 years in a political struggle. So they master the tools of that struggle. We are engaged in an intellectual, in the economic struggle and the cultural struggle. That requires different tools. And the tools start first with ideas. We need to empower ourselves at the level of ideas. As somebody, Margaret Thatcher says in a movie, or is quoted to have said, but it's a quote from Gandhi, that what we think we become. That is, it all starts with ideas, then ideas turn into words, words turn into action, action turns into habit, and habit is what defines your character, and your character is what defines your destiny. So unless we empower ourselves with ideas, because even when it comes to a business and empowerment, that people in business come up with an idea and they turn that idea into a business enterprise, and then they employ more people. But where we simply want to be part of other people's business ideas, we contribute little. So the idea, the centrality of education, the centrality of ideas to take us forward is the struggle of today. And unfortunately, it is your struggle. To sit on the sidelines and complain, and you see what we do in South Africa best, is complain and complain, protest, destroy. Some of us succeeded despite and to spite and in spite of apartheid. And that is very important because we used to say, black men, you're on your own. And when you accept that you are on your own, it means you are saying, I'm going to be my own liberator. So we have a challenge. Instead of finding fault with other people, we must be asking, what is it that I'm doing? Americans, the JFK said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. But when you listen to the discourse that we have even among us academics, it is always, this government is not doing this for me. You find people who are saying, I'm not going to vote because I don't have a house. We're the only country in the world where people think just a vote will give you a house. All other people know that to get a house, you must work, to do this, society. But here, we are the only country that says, I voted 3 times. Where is the house? So all I'm saying, Xolani, is that this generation needs to think differently. We need to craft ideas. And we need to think about the future. What Israel has done, which is what I like, and what I like about this forum, is that we are forward-looking. But what it means is that we are also being brave, courageous about our conviction to say, to create this future that is rosy, what is it that we are doing, as opposed to blaming the people who came before us. And just to close on this, the American president, JFK, I like Americans because they believe in dreams. In 1957, when the Soviet Union launched a small satellite called Sputnik into space, the Americans realized that they've been outsmarted in the contest for technological and scientific supremacy. Sputnik was just the size of a rugby ball, but they launched into space. And the American president looked at that and says, no, what we're going to do, we're going to do better. We're going to put the man on the moon. And people with the religious orientation were shocked about how can this guy think that the man will walk on the moon. And of course, the scientific enterprise in America at the time was low. There were no teachers in the sciences, but because they dared to dream the impossible, 10 years later, they put the man on the moon. So our challenge today is to dream the impossible and ask, what are the necessary things that we must do to make sure that that is realized? Remember, Mandela said in his last part of his quote that it is an ideal for which I hope to live and see realized. And if need be, my Lord, it's an idea for which I'm prepared to die. I'm not asking you to die. I'm asking you to dream.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Prof. Thanks, Prof. A lot of things, very important things. But also one of the questions, and perhaps we can just discuss it as we continue, it comes back to what may be current issues of politics. You're talking about people saying, oh no, we want houses, 3 years, voting, da. But in my mind, it reflects how we treat politics as ordinary South Africans. We treat politicians and we take them seriously when they promise us. People don't ask that out of the blue. It's because politicians promise it. They say, we're going to build you houses, and people will go and vote. Even now, big issue, 6 million job opportunities or jobs, people will vote for that. And that is why people then in the end will say, wait a minute, you promised that in 2009, you promised that in 1999, we are still waiting. It is within that context. Perhaps what we should also be talking about is the state of our politics and whether or not it empowers people to make these decisions. Do we have the proper politics in this country in order for people to discuss those? Look, it's in the run-up to the elections. It's less than 2 weeks. We'll be going to the elections again. Certain promises will be made. How do we deal with those as ordinary people? Because it's also a different place here as opposed to out there. Here, We're among friends, we're among equals, we're among the middle class. But the bigger part of South Africa isn't this part. So how do you deal with those dynamics then in society, Prof?
Thank you very much. Before I answer your question, I'd like to draw on the narrative or the contestation that was put on the table regarding to the reconstruction agenda and the contestation between the exile and those who are within the nation state. I think we would not be doing justice to that evaluation of the post-exilic and the exilic experience if we do not also remind ourselves that even though the competing narratives of those who were in exile and those who were within, that the agenda and the invitation by the prophet was that society had to choose life and act in hope. And that is the message that the prophet Nehemiah, Ezra, and even the exile prophets are inviting society to do. What does it mean when the prophets say, choose life, act in hope? Precisely because the gift of life, according to John 10:10, is that it should be a full life that appreciates the dignity that God has granted to all people, that enables the flourishing of society in which the economics of a society are distributed in such a way that all citizens are able to live with dignity. That society ought not to honor and allow themselves to be dictated for in the choices that they make because of mammon. If you remember, Jesus Christ cautions against the worship of mammon, but invites citizens to use the resources in the ways that are enabling to their lives. And I'm moving that discourse of the competition of the exilic experience, also of the inside, and the competition of voices and narrative of what agenda has to be taken. But in this invitation, for example, by Jesus to say, worship not mammon, but God. This is a proper invitation for 20 years after democratization in South Africa, because it invites us as Christians to ask ourselves, what is the quality of the democracy that we have chosen for ourselves? We chose, prior to 1994, the representative democratic approach where political parties choose who should be the leaders. Other contexts choose the first past the post or constituency-based democracy where the political people in office are accountable directly to the constituencies that they're serving. These are the choices that we made. We decided we wanted the political parties to represent us. And therefore, what is the role of a citizen? They reminded us that agency is something that we as citizens, agency is defined or referred to as the power to make decisions within ourselves by virtue of being human beings who can think, who can reflect, who can analyze what are the best possibilities or opportunities available for us when we make decisions. And I'm saying, we are saying majority of our people are dependent on the politicians for making their decisions. But in a democratic society, it is through exercising your vote, it is through, in democratic processes, ensuring that when policies or when laws are put to the table before they are discussed, that you as a citizen participate. So for example, when the budget is discussed, how money is allocated for what things in South Africa, do citizens engage? Or do they wait for economists who are promoting private property versus the common good to be the mainstream voice that speaks on their behalf? It is the responsibility of us as citizens to say, why are you as the state making money for military or for maybe other activities to be higher than money for education, money for health. Analyze our budgets. I also think it is imperative that we hold ourselves accountable as citizens. We should not only point the blame when politicians do not make constructive decisions which impact badly. The reality of our 20 years of democracy is that we are in the world also still considered to be the most polarized society, where the poor and the rich or the affluent live totally contrasting lives, where there are those who go to sleep without anything, and those of us who live and throw food in the dustbins. The moral conscience of society would be, how do we ensure that from the policy of reconstruction and development, from the policy of gear that he referred to what was called as Giza, and to the current conjecture, how do we ensure that these policies, whilst enabling our society to ensure that there is a ground to transform our society, how do we enable them to also speak to the poor people on the ground, to those who have fallen through the cracks of life, especially in the light of the preferential option for the poor as articulated in Luke chapter 4:19, where Jesus announces his ministry to say, I've come to liberate the poor, those without sight, those who are forgotten, those whose society sometimes neglect. And that is the invitation that you as citizens, but also as the church, have to speak to. Finally, I'd like to say one of the worst contradictions which we, when we envision the future in South Africa, is that there is a sense of indifference. There is a sense in which we as individuals just care about ourselves as individuals, me, my 2 dogs, and my daughter or my son. And yet we come from a cultural conditioning that says, I am human because you're human, and if you are human and take care of one another, we will succeed, flourish, and thrive together. I don't understand why, when we have such a good grounding and philosophy as South Africans of Ubuntu or Butu, that we are not tapping that and ensuring that it influences our envisioning of the future. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful because young people seem to be active. Our own democracy is allowing the different opportunities for activism. It's even allowing those who it does not understand to form themselves into social movements, into political parties. That is the gift of freedom that our forebears who fought for this liberation called for and enabled us to have. And therefore, I invite young people to understand, even those of us who are middle-aged or who are, to understand the power of education as also an important agenda that South Africa has to drive, because it is only when we enable young people to understand education as the ultimate enabler for transformation, for the improvement of the quality of life, for the improvement of the quality of the democratization that we have fought for, which exists, which is successful, but with own contradictions, that we can transform as a society. And finally, I would say, if we want future generations to respect the journey of freedom that was pursued by our forebears, it is imperative for the current generation to ensure that they speak truth to power, they engage society, they use the tools of agency to ensure that they propel this society to success and not to disable it from achieving or flourishing. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, I'm just making sure that you're ready to ask your questions. You will raise your hand. We've got ushers who are just in our midst, and they are the ones who will come to wherever you are, and you'll ask. We're going to keep questions very brief because of time constraints. Thanks again, Prof. But one of the things, Ralph, that the Prof is raising is the issue of speaking truth to power. A little earlier on, she was talking about the contradictions in terms of the moral quotient in society and so on. And one of the narrative or one of the discussion points in society is that, quite frankly, current government, or at least the current administrators, there's a lot more corruption that is happening in our society. In fact, I had a call from one person, prominent, who used to be involved in politics, and they were saying, look, sometimes I just cannot identify with the current government. I'm not sure if our levels of tolerance of corruption are the same. In other words, they're not representing what I represent in terms of how they view corruption now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Xolani.
Speak truth to power, my bro. You are young.
Well, you get the government that you deserve. And you get the leaders that you deserve. And I'll explain what I mean by that.
Please do.
South Africans tend to wake up and be surprised about what is in front of them. And then they distance themselves and say, I can't believe this leader and all that. But they're the ones who either voted for those leaders or did not stand up and vote for someone else. And the big emphasis in this country, I listen to radio a lot from 6 in the morning. This leader, until you are sure. They will be coming and talking about leaders.
I've never.
But something that I find disturbing is that no one wants to talk about leadership. We create leaders in this country. I'll be very frank. I'll give strict, clear examples.
Yeah.
We created President Thabo Mbeki as this incredible reader who spent the night reading, an intellectual. And by then, and I was there, Xolani, I was watching, I was there. By then, people were even scared of criticizing. How can you? President Mbeki will hit with this two-nation speech and all that. We created him. When we got tired with him, we said he was distant, aloof, doesn't understand the people. He was far from the people. He has created what people call an imperial presidency, centralized, protecting his friends in the cabinet. Government ministers were not actually allowed to do their own jobs because they were directly accounting to him. He was just too much. We created another leader, President Jacob Zuma. He said, he's great, man of the people. We love him, everything. Look at his smile. We went that further. The body language and everything. He's like a dad next door. We created that personality and we fitted that personality into our political landscape. We're tired of him now. He's bad, he's horrible, corrupt, and all that. He's taking us all down. And we have even accused him of things that he actually found when he got into his presidency. Why? Because at this point, we conveniently want to get rid of him. Some are busy creating Julius Malema as a leader, as an alternative. He's great, he understands the poor and everything. I, for one, am not convinced. And I'll be very frank. I'm never convinced with this. But they're creating an alternative figure. And they're overlooking the weak points that they should be discussing. The reason is that we are not discussing leadership. As citizens, we are not stepping up to the space that we have. There is no political party that is going to shape the moral genus within the society. You can't do something that will minimize the votes. People should get it. Political parties want to maximize the votes. And that is the main purpose. Delivery is something they do as long as it is largely incidental and beneficial to them to maximize those votes. So I believe it is up to citizens to then hold political parties to say that we have this sense of leadership. This is what we want in a leader. Find someone among you. We won't help you to create individuals after every 5 years and build them as this incredible, messiah. We won't do that. But what we want in a leadership is this, is that. I think South Africans are not doing that yet. They are not exercising their God-given right of citizenship to say to political parties that we want this, we do not want that. We are observers. And let me take you to the middle class as well. The middle class are actually the West when it comes to that. And they are here. I like talking to people straight. The problem with the middle class is that they reside to their personal space. I can live in my 1 million rand house. I can pay for my security. I can pay for a private company to come and get the refuse. I don't need to be part of this discussion. The problem is that you're going to wake up in the morning and hit the street. You come into contact with that social problem that you're not weighing in. And if you compare politics in America, where I've observed elections quite a lot, they're driven a lot by the middle class. In South Africa, if you ask us are we having good politics going into these elections? There are two paradigms in this country that are dominating, and none of them include the middle class. It's the paradigm of the poor, where you have political parties talking right to the poor. And you've got another political party that is saying to the rich, we will protect the assets here and there. In the middle of this is the middle class. They can't afford those houses. They're in a large debt like me. They cannot be able to keep, they are becoming an increasingly forgotten class. But they have so much power. They can speak, they can write to the media, they have airtime to stay on your show while you are saying, hold on, we'll get back to you. But they're not using that. So, in my view, you cannot build a society without increasing the number of the middle class. Because practically the poor one day will get tired and just slaughter the rich. Because there is no, Professor spoke about the vision. It's not about what we have now. It's about the vision. The reason why we are having some of the challenges we have, the reason why you have crime and all these kind of things in our society, is because you cannot sit with someone who's desperate and say to them, hang on, you see what is happening, you're going to be part of that. You can't promise that future. It's not about what you deliver. You can deliver 1 million houses today, but as long as you do not have realistic expectation that someone can move from being the poor to the middle class and the rich, you are not going anywhere. This is why this is making the American dream alive. I've observed, I've lived there for a while. Americans is not about what they have now. They believe in building it. And the conditions are such that they are promising, because you cannot promise unrealistic dream. I think the middle class need to take that responsibility. It's been a long time. Maybe in 1994, you have withdrawn, but you have to come back into the space and weigh in. Imagine what a simple call from someone in Centurion who know their story, we've been reading newspapers, can actually get electricity restored within a short space of time. Yeah. So we need to do that.
Thank you very much. Well, hopefully later on I'll get an opportunity to clarify how we take calls on my show. Dr. Zondi, another element, and I really would like us to discuss this because it came through a little earlier on about the economics of this country, the young people taking part and so on. The policy space, does it allow people to do that? The policy space, does it allow people to thrive? Does it allow ideas to grow? Or do you think that the policy space still stifles those ideas? It isn't just perhaps about the policy, but it's also about the divisions in society. Those who have, do they allow those who do not have to have these creative ideas, these big ideas? Can they thrive in our society?
Oh, that's a difficult one. You reserve the most difficult questions to me. And then, all right, that's fine. But the short answer to that, in my view, is that as it has come out from this discussion, there is no problem with the structure of things. The Constitution we have says everything that we may wish to do. It guarantees us rights to do anything, even to insult, by the way. That's why there's this case with the DA against the ANC over how they called President Zuma. But no one is going to clobber the DA for saying that. We can say he stole. Then they can contest it in court and all. So it basically can do pretty much do anything we want to do. Now, if we accept that the stage is set, and the stage is set for something great to happen, and then you look back later a couple of days, that then something great is still not happening, We have to raise the question with the one who must do something great, in my view. If the constitution has been done, if what Mandela's generation needed to do was to lay the basis for the next phase. For me, democracy is a milestone. It is a point at which you lay the basis for the next thing to happen. The challenge we've had is that we fought for freedom, which is what Professor Sipi was describing, for people to live harmony and have equal opportunities. But we are celebrating the vehicle to freedom, which is democracy. We are still locked in the democracy and not moving further to the next one, which means under democracy, they placed the platform for anything, for black people to start to own business, for black people to take command of their own areas. Now, you can now even go to a white school and be a member of the school governing body, but you don't find middle class there. Because it's too much time to go to a school's parents' meeting. Middle class doesn't even have time to go to a school governing body meeting. So can we then run society? So the stage is set. The biggest crisis we have is that we're not having people galvanized, conscientized enough to do the simple things that they need to do. So we often say we have great plans, but these plans come to naught. There is a gap there. The gap there is a human factor. The real big crisis South Africa has is not shortage of material. It's not shortage of vision. We now have a new vision for 2035.
Yeah, NDP.
And all of those things. But the greatest challenge, Xolani, I think, which is going to determine what we become in the next 20 years, is going to be human factor. In my view, I have no question about it. It's this one big current. If this generation of these people here do not do what the Mandela generation did at the time, we can plan whatever we'd like, dream whatever we'd like. It will not happen.
All right, that's great. Mkhize, you want to say something about it? I'm ready. Yeah, big round of applause for the panelists, eh? All right, I'm ready to take questions. But just throw this forward as well, because the reason why we're here is because clearly it is accepted that we in the company of the middle class. But actually, what defines the middle class in this country? Is the black middle class the same as the white middle class? What are some of the challenges that specifically face the black middle class in terms of trying to make it in this economy or trying to make it in this political environment? Because those are some of the minute details that determine how we go forward, I suspect. Professor?
I think there are things that are within us that we can do. And I think Ralph was also correct that in terms of leadership, that we create people and instruct them to perform in a particular way. And when they do that, then we become dissatisfied. But the question that we need to be asking ourselves, and I go back to the history of this country, when the black communities took charge of themselves. I grew up in a school in Naledi, where the schools were places of learning. And you would not, if you broke a window of a school, you'll be in trouble with the school, you'll be in trouble with the community, you'll be in trouble at home. Because we valued that. A number of years later, I went to one of the high schools. I found that every window that could be broken was broken. So what it was saying is that society no longer values this. So there's a need to protest against a particular behavior. In as much as we used to protect the schools, today you have communities that stop their children from going to school because they are not happy with some MEC. How do you act in the manner that destroys the future of the children because you are unhappy with somebody? I was in the UK when there was violence in the UK. It was called the riots. Yeah. I think about 3 years ago. And I read the newspapers. All of them were condemning it. They were saying not by Britain. And the Prime Minister and everybody. But what was significant for me was to see the the parents calling the police to say that child on television who is breaking, that is my child, come and arrest that child.
Sell out.
Not in my, they were saying, this is my Britain, and I will not allow that. Now today, you see adults going into town, destroying property, and we simply captured in the media as people angry, instead of asking, should these adults behave that way? These are workers, adults, destroying, making the town filthy. What do you expect the young kids to do? They look at that and say, for us to raise our voice, we must destroy.
All right.
So let us restore ourselves first before we blame other people.
Okay, fantastic. So a quick comment before I go, and the reason why I was standing up is because I was just trying to see if somebody's standing out there. Oh yeah, there already are questions, but Professor? Oh, there's a problem with the microphones here. Where's the audio person?
Okay.
Oh, that's good.
I'd like to argue that in any transformative agenda, it has always been the middle class, precisely because they are equipped with tools of education, tools of exposure, tools of analysis, including economic opportunities that have always steered revolutionary transformation. By revolutionary transformation, I'm not drawing on the current discourse of some political parties, but on revolution as that movement for change, for the betterment of a society. You look at the struggles of people 205 years ago in Haiti. It was those who were educated or those who have bought their freedom as black people who were able to fight for the first freedom of black people in a state, in our society. You look at Cuba. Fidel Castro himself was not from the poor background. He was middle class. You look in the context of South Africa. Former President Mandela, Professor Robert Sobukwe, many of these liberation icons were themselves people who had acquired some form of education, who were able to analyze their society, and who envisioned alongside with their society to change it for the better. And therefore, it is the responsibility of the middle class to ensure that there are no distortions of freedom or of democracy, but that they spearhead constructive engagement and transformation of society for the better.
Sure.
Thank you.
Mkhize, I'm going to come back to you. And by the way, that includes, and I understand your point, Ralph, and I understand the point made by Professor Siepe as well, but I reserve my right to change my mind about a leader. That I voted for him in 2009 doesn't mean that I can't change my mind the following day. If I think he's corrupt, he's corrupt. So I'll change my mind and I'll call a radio station and I'll say my leader has changed. Yeah, there's a question over there. Please just identify yourself. Stand up, please.
All right, good morning. My name is Thomas Lungwani. I work in the education sector. And I am very angry with a black parent. And I want to ask Prof. Siepe that what will it take a black middle class to put the interest of the child ahead of everything else, particularly when it comes to education? You'll see a lot of parents coming to my school in January, queuing, get the child admitted. You'll see them again in December, demanding the results. Throughout the year, they don't pay school fees. They tell you it's a government school, but they come knowing it's a fee-paying school. You drive over weekends past white high schools, you'll see lots of cars there, parents supporting their children on Saturday in sporting activities and what have you. You go to similar black schools. Now I'm talking about former Model C schools where the majority are black kids. These parents are not there. We have athletics at Pilditch Stadium. You can be embarrassed. You find that there are more white parents there, not a single black parent. Black kids are accompanied by their teachers. This is grossly unacceptable. It is not fair. It should not happen.
Mr. Xolani, thank you very much. Let me take another question. We're going to come back to you. Thank you. Good question. A couple of ladies over there. Is there a microphone, sir? So I'm going to take maybe 4 questions and then we'll get answers.
Thank you very much, Gwala's morning, and to your the learned machinery there. Stand up. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. My name is Nonkululeko Gombat. And I think I'm posing my question partly to Kabazel, but I think the other panelists can also take into the question. You spoke of the dynamics of paradigms. And I think Professor Zondi, they also alluded to where the country is coming from a paradigm paralysis to where we are. We've witnessed the paradigm shift, but also we're 20 years into this democracy. And I can say indeed there is a good story to tell in this country. But the emergence of political parties, the current state of affairs, the issues of your dual transition, we've witnessed the one of the political transition, the economic transition. There's a question mark in that, and particularly to Kabazel, with your book talking to Vision 2050. What is it that one can expect? What is it that you are alluding to there in relation to the two transitions? But also, when I talk to the current state of affairs in closing, there is a headline today by Archbishop Desmond Tutu where he's saying he's glad that Nelson Mandela is dead, and so as the other stalwart of our democracy, because they shouldn't be living to witness what is happening today. Is it suggesting that we are moving to another paralysis, or maybe one can read differently? Because Paul Majadili was saying, if people were to vote wisely in these elections, they should take into cognizance the fact that why give it to a first-timer when we have a government that has got 20 years experience in taking South Africa forward? Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a lady right next to you also would like to ask a question. Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Zanele Zigalala, and I am in the engineering field. I'm very passionate about the youth. I'm very passionate about education. As I understand...
Continue.
Is it on? Okay.
Yeah.
As I understand that if we do invest in the youth, we will definitely be having the 2050 leaders sitting here who are equipped in terms of handling the challenges of the future. Now, to Untate Sipho Siepe, you spoke earlier on about the tools that are being utilized being the tools of the past. And yes, I think as South African black people, the apartheid system taught us how to doi. It taught us how to revolt. It taught us how to be reactive and be violent in actually wanting to obtain what we need to. Now, I'm a practical person, and there are quite a number of young people who are in this church who would want to be equipped with the correct tools in order to be able to voice their opinions, in order to be able to, as Umama said, to be able to actually contribute as well. Now, how do we practically make sure that that's possible, and what are the tools that are acceptable that they can utilize in being able to actually do that, and in a proactive manner? We can no longer actually have people toy and destroy property and destroy facilities. How can they do it practically? When they leave out of here, what would we say that they should do in order to contribute?
Great, thank you. Good question. I'll take the last question in this batch. Sir?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. My name is Poloso.
So raise your voice for us, please.
Okay, my name is Poloso Majeli. I think the challenge, the small challenge I have rather is that, is there something called democracy, or is it autocracy that is camouflaged?
Oh, so it's a little difficult. Maybe just come closer.
Okay, sorry. Or the speakers, okay. Is that audible?
Yeah,
okay,
no,
thank you.
Louder.
I wanted to say, is there something called democracy, or is democracy more or less or autocracy that is camouflaged? Let me tell you. Because the challenge that I have is, we have seen through history, you know, Winston Churchill says, the further back you can look, the further forward you're more likely to see. The challenge that I have is that we seem to realize that the societies that have developed ethically and otherwise have always been those that have been more autocratic, but the proper autocracy. And we realize that democracy also gives a problem because you give citizens that may not be truly equipped a bit of power. Okay, from a point that I'm coming from is that God is not even democratic. He is an autocrat of all note. My question is that you have a society. Let me give a case study of Singapore. Singapore is a very autocratic country, but very ethical Christian country as a case study. You are being told that you can't even smoke in front of your children, you can't even drink in front of your children, because this child is first of Singapore than your child. You are going to die and leave the problem with us. Now, the issue is that, how do we build, for me, I feel that we need to go back and realize that we need more of people are more like tea bags. They perform better when they're in hot water. Until you give them some kind of control, that's what God has been doing since creation. He gives a mandate, you stick to that mandate, and that's it. Because the other challenge that I've realized with our country is that we came into a new dispensation without considering some factors. We have a society over time that was being beaten up, killed for a long time. It's a sick society. We have another part of the society that has been doing the beating. Now, we have two categories of people that are sick that are not acknowledging that they're sick. Now, you are trying to move on looking at the fiscal, economic, whatever, without considering the factors of human being in their well-being. And now these problems continue. That's why we have rapes, we have these symptoms that continue to come up because we have a sick society. The lady says in Katlehong, you see, I hear that you're giving me grants, but nobody's telling me that. I see when there was black-on-black violence, my son was killed on the day during the violence, and I see that every day. Nobody's telling me how to deal with that. I see it every day. But somebody's giving me a grant, is giving that. There's this particular sickness and healing process that I don't think we dealt with. And we're trying to focus on economy. That's what I wanted to say.
All right, thank you very much. A couple of questions there, actually. It's not even one question. Kabazela, maybe I should start with you. There was a question specifically for you that relates to Vision 2050.
Yes, thank you. The question was relating to the dialectics of transition and paradigms. There will always be such a tension. How does China move out of Mao into a new leap of new global capitalism, realism? How does Russia liberate itself out of the then necessary paradigm of Lenin into a new paradigm as now being pushed by Vladimir? You know, how does, maybe South Africa was actually blessed to be at the tail of being liberated so that it could have an opportunity to study the what we call the emancipatory and liberationist doctrines, which are necessary when you are outside of the center within the political spectrum. It's very interesting. There's a book edited by Marvin Kumede. He quotes Prof next to me here, how he used to lambast the former President Mbeki in one article where they are talking about how the think tanks between 1984 to 1990 who were intellectualizing and analyzing how the centers of the state must be dismantled and brought down, how then, seeing that it was about to dawn, how were those think tanks were supposed now to be convinced that we need to change our stand of analysis, because we are no longer talking deconstruction against an oppressive empire, but we now have to have an imagination of ourselves within government. Hence it emerged to a document which we call a ready to govern document. So we have this burden of emancipatory doctrines, like your Fanon. That's an emancipatory doctrine. And I want to say again, Ralph, he gave a good analysis about the middle class. But if we end there in saying that the middle class has reverted to domesticating its presence, we will be making a mistake. No. The middle class is in two contracts. The first contract of the middle class is what Fanon calls in the pitfalls of national consciousness, is that the middle class is caught up in a battle of trying to emulate the middle class of the oppressive empire, of which you do not have their major characteristic that of their relations to the means and the structure of production. To get a master's degree doesn't make you a middle class. There is more to what should qualify. To get a master's degree and 15,000 or above does not immediately translate you into middle class. There has to be a traceable other things which qualifies you to be middle class. Your relation to the means of production, the extent of time and over time you have been in such relation to the means of production. Now, that's the first contract we are in, the middle class, is that we are in constant pursuit of an illusion, trying to emulate and be made in the image of our former colonizer. So that's the middle class that is right in the private sector. The other middle class is in the contract with what we call the bureaucratic managerial class, which is incentivized by the ruling party that you will manage the state for us, and we will try to design laws that doesn't interfere with your property interests. So until we get into that and zoom into that, we haven't analyzed the middle class. Then the last point, we need at this point in time to debate whether we still want to continue with vanguard politics. Vanguard politics is the politics of, if you read Galatians chapter 4, I'm using the Bible because we're in a context. If you read Galatians chapter 4, the scriptures talk about an heir who remains a child because his age hasn't matured and has a guardian. And then it says that until such time, the heir will be treated as a slave. We are treated as slaves in our own country because we do not have the necessary intellectual, political, economical maturity. Hence, we are engaged in vanguard politics, where we think that a politician or incumbent or a campaigner will be the one who will ascertain that my rights and my desires are accomplished. Now, what usually happens when there is when we are clogged in the vanguard politics is that there will always be a need. Hey, I'm gonna say something very bad. There will always be a need for a collateral class or a collateral damage class. Vanguard politics always guarantees that those who are the vanguards, those who are the keepers, they must always on our behalf sadly decide whom must the earth open and be swallowed so that they can continue in that position abagion. Now they also will decide that no, labor must be disoriented, especially vanguard labor, organized labor must be disoriented, because if it is oriented, we are not going to be able to exercise vanguard politics. We are no longer going to be able to be the good custodians of their goods. So the middle class must make a confession, like Nehemiah. Nehemiah was middle class, but before he could engage himself in the process of reconstruction, requesting the letter from the king, he had to make a confession on behalf of himself and his people and say, the thing is, the middle class, because it deceives itself that we are hidden in our own houses, we drive our own cars, we just move from one office to another office in our homes. It doesn't touch. We need to go back and have a social contract and say, we have left our own people. Because what you find is that if there's a joke I had, I'm closed one, there's a joke I had in a premarital counseling session. One guy said there was a bunch of men, about 60, and he said to these guys, the facilitator, can you all take out your cell phones? Then he said to them, can you type these words to your wife or your prospect? No, it was actually married and to be married. He said, can you text these words to your partner? Say, I love you. And then he says, after 5 minutes, when you get a response, just stand up and read the SMS for us. The SMSs were reading like this. Hey, what is wrong, honey? Are you okay? Baba, what do you want to say? Let me tell you, if the so-called middle class of South Africa were to be instructed that Can you take us to visit where you come from? You are home. What you will find is that people will not even take you to their addresses. Yet we are in these urbanized areas and we are calling ourselves middle class because we have divorced ourselves from the necessary contract of being in contract with our people, not those two contracts that I have alluded to.
Thank you, Kabaze. Thank you. Prof?
I think in a way Israel has captured some of the points that I think we should be addressing. And it's, he puts it very nicely, the politics of vulgarity. That we have even become so vulgar in our vote catching. Anything that gives us votes, it's okay. And I think it goes also with the media. The things that we feel that are building the nation are the things that you should be promoting. If you promote vulgarity, violence, that's what you are breeding in society. And if you look at I'll tell you a very interesting case that happened. It involves the leader of the EFF and a certain legal scholar and not even the scholar, but one of the leading lights in the litigation, Trengrove. When Trengrove was going to address the University of Cape Town, there were a large number, there was investment by the papers promoting the event. 3 weeks it appeared in the newspapers. And the university created a small holding, like a hall, that could take up to 150 people. When 3 days before he were to give that lecture, there was a rumor that Julius Malema was going to come to the university. And the university decided to say, well, we'll give him also 150, a room that can accommodate 150 people. A day before, they heard that, no, this rumor is actually true. Then the university changed the room to 600. In the morning, they had known that he's actually on the plane. Then they changed the room to 1,000. But Trengrove's room remained the same. Then they heard that Julius Malema has landed. Then the room changed to 1,500. Trengrove's room remained the same. By the time that Julius arrived, there was no space to accommodate people. But what it also says is the things that attracts people. And as the writer indicated, that were those who came to listen to the gospel according to Julius, there were those who came for entertainment value, and there were those who came for curiosity, out of curiosity. And in the end, all of them were satisfied. But Trengrove addressed a very small number of people. But that society tells you what is it that we value. Not that Julius did not say anything that was vulgar, but it still made a statement about who we are as a society. So I do think that we need to sometimes be willing to lose for a bigger cause than to be a victim of short-termism, that what is it that I can get now. Now, going back to the question of education, it's one of the most painful things because some of us are products of people who were willing to give their time. The question that you need to ask, how many of us here go out and give our time to the schools? I was taught by people who were still students at university, but they volunteered their time to teach free of charge. So let us at least start by reclaiming, give time to our own communities. Then we are going to shape. And because some of us were trained by those people, when we finished, that's what we did. Every Saturday we'll go and teach because other people gave their time for us. So let us do that. And I think it is a damn shame that as the questioner indicated, that when you look at meetings, parents' meetings, it's always white teachers and the white parents. We are not there. That blame is on us, it's not on anybody else. We should care enough for our children to be able to make sure that we're there. Then there's an issue that I also think is important, Xolani, is the reclaiming of the right of children to be children. Right now, children participate. When I was teaching in high school or even at university, children, we did not determine who is going to teach. That is not their job. And when I was at university, I had students who wanted to be part of management, and they could not even manage their own courses. So what I used to say to them is that your primary business here is to learn, is not to assist me in running the university. If you can show that you can manage your studies, then we can have a discussion. So my students, my SRC, before they came to me, I'll call the register and say, can I have the academic records? So that when they come, we talk about the academic record. But right now, you find students participating in the selection and appointment of professors. What did you know about that? But we allow it because we are being populist. And you go to places like Harvard, you find there's appointments of professors. You'll never find students being involved. They're not interested. And these are students who are going to become Nobel Prize winners in their subject. They understand that their role at university is to learn. So we need to start by correcting that. In the schools, we need to correct that. And what we need to do to say to our teachers is the business that your job at school is to make sure that you are there on time and you are teaching. But that is not happening. I mean, in my high school, you see kids going to school at 11 o'clock because they've misread the Freedom Charter or misinterpreted, because it says the doors of learning shall be open. They expect the gates to be open the whole time. So there are things that we can do practically. But one of the things that I do want, going practically, let our kids read. There is no shortcut to that. I mean, we used to read so many books. I mean, when I was studying physics, I used to read even books in law. I had finished, at the first year level, I had finished a book on the introduction to law, because engagement intellectually was the most exciting thing. When we went to mass meetings, we'll be showing how much we've actually read. Right now, emptiness is what sells. And I do think that let us restore the normal. And we know what the normal is. The normal is a teacher goes to school, 7 o'clock he's there. And there's reading, there are books, and that is the most basic thing that we can do to our kids. And the books will let them fly. But we're not doing that.
Sure. I hope it partly answers your question then. Your question about democracy versus autocracy, that sometimes somebody must take a decision, but also the practicality question that was raised there. Prof?
Yeah. Thank you very much. I want to follow up on what Israel said. A master's degree does not buy you middle-class status. Neither does a 2 million bank account buy you middle-class status. So what is important then is, what is the responsibility and the ethics that undergird the decisions that you make as an individual, but also their impacts on society as a whole? The invitation from the sister who asked, then what do we do as part of being a community that transforms our society for the better? Our social location, where we sit, what we do, what we have been trained to do, or what talents we have, should guide how we participate in society. If you're an engineer, for example, in the church, in a context 20 years later where there are fewer engineers, black engineers, and women engineers in particular, I'll say this as a woman, but as one who wants to see gender justice as an integral part of our society. How do you then harness those skills, that training, to ensure that many young women and men, but also kids, follow in those footsteps, especially in a career choice that is a scarce skill in South Africa? Secondly, I'd say the responsibility to vote is something that cannot be taken for granted, especially in South Africa, where blood and sweat, where families broke, where some were exiled and some stayed, where society was fractured, that we can take for granted. It is a responsibility that requires exercising, even if we are not comfortable with how we see things being done in this country or how we see our leadership taking their leadership responsibility. So my invitation would be all of you who have universal suffrage, please vote in the 2014 election, because it is something that cannot be taken for granted. My own biological father died in exile. I'm still trying to find whether he died in Tanzania or in Libya in the struggle against apartheid. So it is something that shouldn't be taken for granted. I want to say, because we are in a church, the possibility of life remains for those who fully seize and live the commandment of God. It is an invitation to say, if Jesus Christ died because the Roman Empire killed him, and if he died because it enabled us to speak truth and to enable the flourishing of society, it would be irresponsible, especially for those of ourselves who call ourselves Christians, to then say politics is what is in the social realm and we are preparing ourselves to live in the afterlife. The afterlife and the future is now. I also